Yeah, I don't want to jinx it, but we have a very pro testing developers. Not all the QAs or not all the developers are on the same level, so sometimes it requires bit of training or upskilling. Testers are born pessimistic, right?
Ami, it's nice to chat. So excited to get to talk to you today a little bit more about how you and your team have been doing QA these days. But before we get into it, I would love to understand a little bit more about your background.
Yes, so a brief background about me. So I've been working in QA for more than a decade now, decade and a half actually now. And I started my career as a manual tester for one of the US companies based in West Coast. So I was doing some testing on their annuities platform. Is that the right word? Annuity? Yes. And so I did that for 4 years, and then I moved to Norway, Oslo. I worked with a financial institution. I've been doing a lot of manual testing, automation, and since last 3 years, I've been focusing mostly on the non-functional testing and security being my focus area. And in my current company, I have been working for almost 3 years now. I'll complete 3 years in July. Yeah, in July. So day to day, we are mostly dealing with thinking about new solutions which we can implement in testing. For example, what kind of tools we want to bring in for API testing, for front end testing, for performance, or for security. Most of the teams are using sprints, and so we do sprint refinements, retrospectives. We bring in some product backlog items into the sprint. Then development happens, and then it goes for testing. And testing includes the manual testing for some part, and then automating it using the automation tool which we have. We are using Cypress, and we also have some performance test in place, and we are using K6 over there.
I'm curious just if you could give folks an understanding a little bit more about what the application that you're working on actually does. Like what kind of users does it serve? Is it web app, mobile app, desktop, mainframe? That kind of, just a little bit more background about the kind of environment that you're working in and the kind of users that you're serving.
Yeah, so it is going to be a web application, and it will be used by the engineers working in oil and gas companies. So we provide a collaboration tool for oil and gas companies. So the engineers working there will be using it. They will be using it for viewing their 3D model of the platforms, maybe viewing some documents, and they can collaborate with the other engineers as well. So basically will be a web application and not a mobile application. So and can be used both on the desktop and the tablets.
Tell me a little bit more about what this process has been like to rethink your tooling stack.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's always to think about some new tools and compare with the existing ones. So we did find, okay, the conclusions might vary with different use cases, but for us, Playwright seems to be a bit more faster as compared to Cypress. It might be different for different use cases, but for our use case, it we found that Playwright was slightly faster. And given the reason that we are planning to move toward continuous deployment, so we want our test runs to be as quick as possible. So we are slightly leaning towards Playwright. It's still not decided, but we'll see how it goes. And for performance testing, we are quite happy with K6. So we are going to probably continue using that. But it's an interesting process of evaluating different tools and comparing the results and doing some pros and cons, like which tool is better for our needs and which is not. So yeah, it's an interesting journey which we are on right now.
The fact that you have such an established automation program is something that I think is pretty interesting. There's a lot of teams that are relying pretty heavily on automation, but I also have talked to a number of teams who have said, look, we're so early in the application development process, or maybe we're so heavily dependent on manual, it's hard for us to imagine being able to shift a lot of that work to automation and really rely on it. So I'm curious if you have any advice for teams that are in that position right now that haven't adopted an automation tool. Obviously, it's case dependent, depends on the technology that they're testing, but was there anything that was helpful for your team?
Yeah, I think starting from the scratch, we just knew that we need to have the automation suite in place. So given the scope of the product, so we were adding a lot of new features every month almost, and doing the manual testing was not scalable at all. Then the releases in production would have taken more than a month if we had to do everything manually. So we started building our test automation suite from almost, I'll not say day one, but maybe day 50th. So, and we started building our test automation suite. So it took some time in making it more reliable because we had a lot of flaky tests. And it was not only because of our test automation code, it was also because of the application behavior. So we try to we kind of make our application stable as well from the development side. So once it became stable, once our test scripts became stable, we slowly started seeing the benefit out of it. And it was not a quick win, I'll say. It took us some time to reach that level of maturity, but I think we have attained that level of maturity. Now we can rely on our test automation suite, which is in Cypress. And it's difficult to tell you the percentage, like how much we have reduced, but it's definitely more than 60% what we have automated right now. And so earlier, for example, just for an example's sake, so earlier if a release was taking 5 days to test, just quoting some numbers. So
Sure.
yeah, and now it takes maybe 2 days max, given there's no bug fix or hot fix in the release.
Just
Yeah,
to be able to carry out the basic testing cycle. That's a
yeah,
pretty
just a
drastic
testing.
improvement.
Yes. So
Wow.
just exaggerating a bit, but it is a fact.
Yeah.
So 5 days, and it includes the hot fixes and everything. But now it takes less time than before, for sure. We have reduced our test effort quite a lot just by introducing test automation in place.
You mentioned that you still do some manual testing. Is
Mhm.
that just because you haven't gotten a chance to automate all of it, or are there some of the test approaches that your team's doing that you will probably leave manual going forward? Like what have you left manual, and are you planning to leave that manual, or is that the kind of thing where just over time you'll continue to automate that away?
Yeah, there are still some use cases which cannot be automated or very tricky to automate. So I'll not say we are 100% dependent on automation right now. So we still need to do some spot checks using, by doing some manual testing. And also the new features, sometimes we don't get, or sometimes we lack time to automate the new features within the sprint. Then it goes into the next sprint, and then we have to automate it later. So features like those also needs to be tested manually. So yeah, there are some use cases which cannot be automated. So we have to keep it for manual
Yeah, where it's just
verification.
not
Yeah.
worth the effort, or literally can't be automated, right? I mean,
Yeah.
given the current tool stack, obviously these things continue to develop and new capabilities come out, but that definitely makes sense. There it seems like there's always this cost benefit analysis when you're
Yeah.
thinking about what to automate, right? There's so many use cases where automation can pretty reliably verify the functionality that you're trying to double check and assure is working, but then there's just it seems like there's consistently, most of the teams I've talked to, there's always some portion of functionality that's just like, well, why spend the time automating it, given that it's going to take us longer to automate and or maintain those automated tests than it would to just make sure that we've got some bright person who can make sure that that functionality is working with the kind of intricacy of the user experience part of that. That can also be a factor there too. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and testers are born pessimistic, right? So we would like to see, okay, let's see what how it looks. Even the automation suites are running, but we still want to see, okay, what is going on in the application. So yeah,
Totally.
yeah.
I'm really impressed. You mentioned just a minute ago about how when you were starting to get more and more of your tests in your automation suite, you recognized one of the difficulties was the flakiness of the tests.
Mm.
And so you mentioned doing some work on the automation side to try to improve the flakiness, but you also, it sounds like you worked pretty closely with the development team.
Yeah, I don't want to jinx it, but we have a very pro testing developers in our company. So they kind of promote a lot of testing activities in the company. So it's not only QA who's trying to propagate quality in the company, but it's also develop coming from the developers. They also want to have, they also want to ensure good quality in the product. And so convincing them to for anything was not a hard task, and we got some support from the management as well. They are also protesting for some reason, so I don't want to jinx it, so let's hope they continue. And but coming to the more practical, what we did was, for example, the quickest win for us was to add some unique attributes in the application which the automation suite can identify. So initially it was not, so when we were developing the code, we were not planning for it to be included in the new feature, for example, or a new page. So we were not considering that part at all. But slowly we learned that we need to have some data IDs in place. And then we made it a point, or we made it a practice to discuss about that in the refinement meetings. So if, for example, we are discussing about some new issue, we discuss, okay, whether this particular issue needs some new data ID. So, and that's why QA needs to be the part of the refinement meeting, because then they can analyze, okay, this particular panel or the page or whatever feature is getting introduced, it needs to have some data selectors in place which can be used in the test automation. And that can quickly bring down the level of flakiness in your test. That is just my experience. It might be different for different people, but just my experience says that there were a lot of flakiness because of some random nth column 1, 2, 3, 4, and selecting based on the location of the button. Instead of that, we can use the unique identifier, and that was quite effective, in my opinion. Yeah.
It sounds like you weren't aiming for perfection immediately either. It doesn't sound like you had some big project to go back and add unique identifiers like ID tag or data IDs to all of the existing elements either. It sounds like you phased this practice in over time with new features, maybe then went back as you were working in other parts of the application and added them back in. But it wasn't like this wholesale, okay, we got to go back and add unique identifiers to all of the elements in our application. Let's just start with the new work that we're doing and build this practice up over time. Is that
Yeah,
right?
and yeah, that is correct. So we build it gradually, not like doing a big project and overhauling the entire product. We didn't do that. And also the for the older features, what we did, we even the QAs know how to write the data IDs themselves. So they were writing data IDs and creating the merge request and pushing the code themselves. So it's not only we were dependent on the developers, we knew how to do it ourselves. But for the new code, okay, so the developer is already working on it, so it's easier and quicker for them to add it. But for the older code, yeah, we could do it ourselves because we know how to. We are working in TypeScript or JavaScript anyway, and it's easy for us as well. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, and I think just goes to show like the kind of when you start to get folks who have that level of skill that can be like literally collaborating with each other in the same repository on the same code base, how quickly you can start to get these kind of synergies and like productivity gains when you've got QA that directly embedded in development, which not all teams have the skill set to do, but I think there's some other teams I've talked to that don't have the cultural mindset of
Mhm.
QA being that tightly embedded with development. And it just seems like there's so many opportunities if you can really get folks working that closely together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does not happen overnight. So it takes some time to establish these kind of processes. And not all the QAs or not all the developers are on the same level. So sometimes it requires bit of training or upskilling as well. And it is mutually beneficial, the person who is training them, because then it you start to think about those things more. And maybe you also don't know if you're training someone, okay, maybe yeah, I didn't think about that. So once you start giving some education or educating other people, then you also start to think more about that particular topic. And the person who's learning about or on the other side, he or she also learns something new. So I think it's mutually beneficial as well. um, and always it's good to share experiences. Yeah. If you know something, just share.
You'd be surprised how far that can go too. Just like having that little spark of some new idea or insight or skill can then like have this domino effect where somebody can really go off and um, double or triple their
Mm.
productivity. Just like I've seen some pretty amazing instances where just a different perspective on something
Mhm.
can really change how you approach some problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Just need a spark here and they shoot like a rocket.
Absolutely. It is, not every time, but
Yeah,
many
yeah,
times. It's pretty remarkable.
yeah, yeah.
I'm also curious because it sounds like y'all are actually doing some testing work, both developing new automated tests, but also running tests as part of the sprint process. Is that right? Like, what is the typical? How does QA get involved in the overall sprint process? Do you have dedicated sprints for testing when you're coming up for a release, or is QA just part of the development sprint? And as you're completing a development sprint, you're doing the QA work right alongside it. How are you managing that kind of workflow these days?
Yeah, so we are the part of this development sprint. So we carry out our testing activities at the same time when the code is getting developed. So for example, let's say a person is working on feature X and that is not ready yet for testing, then we start working on maintaining our test automation suite. There's always some maintenance activity which is required in the test automation repository. So there's always something for the QA to work until the code is ready to be tested, or maybe a backlog from the previous sprint which was not picked up in the sprint. So we can pick up in the next sprint, and we can start working on it. And about the test automation suite, we usually run it every day, multiple times in a day. um, and the release also happens, so we follow bi-weekly cadence. I mean, once in 2 weeks. And over there we can either trigger our test automation suites manually, we have the pipeline in place, or we can rely on the scheduled jobs which we run every morning or every night. So it is up to us. So yeah, most of the work we do, it's the part of development sprint. We don't have a dedicated testing sprint.
How difficult has it been to sync up the QA
Yeah,
process with that timeline?
yeah. We had to iterate many times to adapt ourselves to this particular new to adapt to this process. We have, for example, 10 different data sets. And earlier we were testing on all those 10 different data sets in all the different environments. Then we thought it does not make any sense to test on all different data sets just for one release on all the environments. So we tried to narrow it down to just one data set in one environment and data verification in the second environment, for example. So that brought down our effort quite a lot. And even in the second environment where we are verifying multiple data sets, we are not verifying all the data sets. We are verifying, for example, the most used data set in production, for example. And over there, we are checking just one or two, and then we are relying on our test automation script over there. So Earlier, all this was manual, and we were doing the verification on all the data sets because the data sets were also very different. So 10 data sets means it's not common data set. It might have some different kind of data in each. The data set one might have a different kind of data. Data set two might have a different kind of data, and that's why we were doing everything manually. But then we going as we proceeded, we found that we are not finding any issues related to the data, and then we thought, okay, it's a good time to stop doing testing on all the different data sets. Just pick one which has like a lot of data and focus on that, and let's enable our test automation script to test on different data sets in the another environment. So we have like two environment, testing and staging, and then we have production. So, and one for development. So yeah, see.
So by making some decisions, like having to evaluate kind of the pros and cons, obviously more test coverage, the more of those data sets that you're running. But on the flip side, it seems like you were identifying there was some level of diminishing returns, and that you would actually get pretty like a satisfactory test coverage by testing one, or then maybe pushing some of the other data sets into your test automation suite running in staging instead of everything having to be tested in the test environment first and then in the staging environment. So like having to make some decisions like that along the way sounds like that was part of what enabled you to kind of sync up the timelines a little bit more easily.
Yes, absolutely. And it was not like just making a call. The call was made on the data which we have. For example, if we are not getting any issues related to the data, then why are we spending so much of time in verifying the data in different data sets? So the call was made on the data which we have in front of us. So we analyzed it. Okay, the issues are not coming over there. Just forget it and focus on something else. Yeah.
Focus on really where you're able to drive more value too.
Absolutely, yeah.
This has been a great conversation. I mean, I'm so grateful for you sharing your experience, the way that your team has been able to line up your QA program with development and find ways to collaborate together. And that you've shared, it's been a process over time, right? It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't this big project to completely refactor your current application. It was the kind of work that it took to make smart decisions and small pieces, see what wins you could get over time that have proven some really drastic outcomes. It was so great to chat. Thank you so much for lending your time and expertise.